Welcome, dear listener. Let's gently close our eyes and take a slow, deep breath, in and out, as we journey back through the mists of time. Imagine soft winds brushing the olive trees, waves lapping the shores of distant seas, and sandals pressing gently into sun-warmed marble. This is the beginning of our peaceful passage into the world of ancient Greece. Ancient Greece is not just a place, it is a memory of brilliance, of ideas, of heroes and philosophers, of gods and temples, of poetry and war, art and reason. It stretches far beyond time, whispering to us from ruins and writings, from myths and legends. Let us begin, slowly, tenderly, by setting the scene. Ancient Greece was not a single country, no. It was a collection of city-states, called polis in Greek. Each polis was like its own tiny world, with its own government, armies, and laws. The most famous of these city-states were Athens, the home of wisdom, and Sparta, the home of warriors. But there were many others, Thebes, Corinth, Delphi, and Rhodes, each with their own stories to tell. Now, close your eyes, and picture the map of the ancient world. Greece lies at the southeastern edge of Europe, its lands scattered like pearls across the Aegean and Ionian seas. Rocky mountains crisscross the land. Gentle plains roll between hills. And the sea, oh, the sea was everywhere. It was the highway of the Greeks. They sailed across it, traded over it, and built myths around its deep, mysterious waves. Greece's geography shaped its people. The mountains made travel hard, so instead of building one large empire, the Greeks stayed close to home. Each city-state grew strong in its own way. Some valued freedom and knowledge, others, discipline and order. But all shared the same language, the same gods, and the same love for stories, especially stories of gods, monsters, and heroic quests. Let's take a slow step back, to the earliest days. Before the great philosophers and wars, before the shining temples and golden ages. There were two early civilizations in the Greek world. First, the Minoans, who lived on the island of Crete around 2000 BCE. They built beautiful palaces, especially at a place called Knossos. Their rooms were bright with frescoes of dolphins and dancers. They worshipped nature, the earth, the sea. Then came the Mycenaeans, on the mainland. They were more warlike, with mighty walls and heroic kings. The tales of the Iliad and Odyssey, sung so gently now in soft voices, are said to echo their time. But one day, the Mycenaeans faded. Their palaces crumbled. Their writing disappeared. And for a while, Greece fell into shadow. A time we call the Dark Ages. But even in darkness, the people remembered. They passed down stories, tales of Zeus and Hera, of Achilles and Odysseus, whispered at firesides, carried by poets. From this quiet period, a new light began to shine. The Greeks re-emerged with song and stone. They began to write again, to build, to explore. They created beautiful pottery, sang hymns to the gods, and founded colonies far across the seas. Their alphabet, borrowed and reshaped, would eventually lead to our own. Their language became a song across the Aegean, soft and ancient. And their beliefs, oh, the gods of Greece. Immortal and passionate, flawed and powerful. The Greeks did not believe their gods were perfect, no, they were like people, but more. They lived on Mount Olympus, watched over the world, and often stepped into the lives of mortals. Every story a soft whisper from the divine. Each Greek city had a temple, a sacred place where people left offerings and prayed. And every 4 years, the cities came together in peace, to honor Zeus with the Olympic Games, a celebration of strength and unity, held under the warm sun and sacred oaths. In this world, people lived in homes with open courtyards. They wore light tunics, called chitons. They gathered at the agora, the marketplace, not just to buy and sell, but to talk, to debate, to dream. Children learned by listening. Girls helped at home. Boys might learn music, poetry, and running. In time, some would become soldiers, others, citizens, and a few, philosophers. Dear listener, ancient Greece is not just marble and myth. It is the hum of bees over time-covered hills. It is the cool shade beneath an olive tree. It is the rise of reason and the beating heart of beauty. As we end this first chapter, let your mind drift gently, over hills of white stone, over deep blue waters, to a land where ideas were born in whispers, and where history speaks in a soft, eternal voice. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and rest with the thought that this is only the beginning. We begin with the geography of Greece, the very land and sea that shaped the people and their stories. Greece is a land of mountains and islands, hills that rise like ancient guardians and seas that stretch endlessly into the blue beyond. The land is rugged, with only small valleys for farming. Because of this, Greek communities grew separately, tucked into mountain corners and on distant islands, each forming its own way of life. The Aegean Sea, with its gentle tides and scattered isles, was more than just water to the Greeks. It was a road, a lifeline, a mirror to the heavens. The Greeks became sailors, traders, and explorers, guided by stars, winds, and dreams. And it was on one of these islands, Crete, that the first great civilization of the Greek world was born. Let me softly introduce you to the Minoans. The Minoans flourished around 2000 BCE, and their home was the beautiful island of Crete, warm and fertile, kissed by sun and sea. They were not a warrior people. Not like others would become. No, the Minoans were builders, traders, artists. They loved color, life, and motion. Their grandest creation was the Palace of Knossos. Imagine it now, rising from the earth like a maze of dreams, hundreds of rooms, staircases turning like rivers, frescoes covering the walls. In these paintings, you'd see dolphins leaping through water, dancers with swirling skirts, and scenes of bull leaping, a daring sport that seemed both graceful and wild. The Minoans wrote in a script we call Linear A, still undeciphered, its soft symbols holding secrets yet to be told. They traded far and wide, with Egypt, with Mesopotamia, across the Mediterranean, bringing home gold, ivory, spices, and stories. They worshipped goddesses of nature, of earth and fertility, and many believe a mother goddess stood at the center of their beliefs, holding serpents in her hands as symbols of life and mystery. But, one day, their world changed. Around 1450 BCE, the Minoan palaces burned. There are whispers of earthquakes, of a great volcanic eruption from the island of Thera, now called Santorini. Some say it caused massive tsunamis, others suggest invaders arrived from the mainland. Whatever the cause, the Minoan civilization faded into silence. But their flame was passed on. To the north, on the Greek mainland, rose the Mycenaeans, a people of strength and pride. They came from lands of stone and shadow, and they would leave their mark in gold and glory. The Mycenaeans appeared around 1600 BCE, and by 1400 BCE, they had taken control of Crete and its legacy. They built fortified palaces on hilltops, places like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. These weren't soft palaces like Knossos, no. These were strongholds, guarded by lion gates, thick walls, and narrow corridors. Their kings ruled as warrior chiefs, their tombs filled with golden masks and treasures, silent reminders of lives once lived in splendor. The most famous of these was the so-called Mask of Agamemnon, a golden face that gazes at us from across the ages, peaceful, eternal. The Mycenaeans spoke an early form of Greek and used a script called Linear B, one we have now learned to read. It tells of offerings to gods, of inventories, of a society already rich with ritual and order. And it is from the Mycenaean world that the great epic tales were born. The Iliad and the Odyssey, poems as soft and thunderous as the sea, are set in the time of Mycenaean kings. The Trojan War, with heroes like Achilles, Odysseus, and Agamemnon, may have been based on real conflicts from this age. Though told in myth, they echo truths, of ships launched, cities burned, and men who longed for home. But just as the Minoans fell, so too did the Mycenaeans. Around 1200 BCE, their palaces were abandoned. Their writing disappeared. Greece entered a time of stillness, a quiet we call the Greek Dark Ages. For about 300 years, the land was scattered with small villages, simple pottery, and fewer records. But even in the silence, something remained. Stories. Memories. Myths. Passed down in whispered songs, by firesides and over hills. And from these ashes, a new Greece would rise. The city-states, the temples, the philosophers, and democracy, all were waiting, sleeping like seeds in the earth, ready to bloom when the time came. So, dear listener, as we end this chapter, imagine the waves around Crete, the great halls of Mycenae under starlight, and the golden face of a long-lost king, resting quietly in the dust of time. Feel the world quiet down, like the hush that falls over a sleeping valley. We are about to enter a shadowed chapter of Greek history, a time of mystery and stillness. This period is known softly, almost poetically, as the Greek Dark Ages, a time that followed the fall of the mighty Mycenaean civilization. It began around 1100 BCE, and for nearly 400 years, the landscape of Greece changed, in ways that are both hidden and profound. It was a time when palaces were abandoned, and the great art of writing faded into silence. No more golden masks. No more grand tombs or shining trade networks. The script we called linear disappeared, and for centuries, not a single written word remains. But darkness is never complete. Though the monuments of stone may have crumbled, and the scribes may have fallen silent, the people remained. They lived in small villages, tucked between hills and near streams. They herded sheep, farmed grain, and gathered around fires. Telling stories passed down by word of mouth, soft and careful. And in those stories, the memory of the past was preserved. The Iliad. The Odyssey. Tales of gods and heroes, battles and long journeys, were not written during this dark time, but they were kept alive through voice, whispered from one generation to the next. Imagine that now, a father telling his children of Achilles and Hector, a mother humming a hymn of Athena as she spins wool. And somewhere in this hush, the seeds of something new began to grow. The villages became more organized. Simple pottery became more refined, we call it geometric pottery, with lovely repeating patterns, neat lines, and shapes that danced quietly across clay. In these pots, we see not just function, but the gentle return of artistry. New leaders rose from these small communities, not kings like the Mycenaeans, but chiefs, or basileis, who led by tradition, reputation, and the wisdom of age. It was not a time of empires, but of clans and customs. And slowly, very slowly, contact with the wider world returned. By around 900 BCE, the Greeks began to sail again. They traded with Phoenicians, who came from the eastern Mediterranean. From the Phoenicians, the Greeks learned something remarkable, something that would reshape their future. An alphabet. Yes, the Greek alphabet was born from the Phoenician one. But the Greeks added something beautiful, they added vowels. For the first time, words could be written exactly as they sounded. It made writing easier, softer, more expressive. This, dear listener, would become the script that gave us Homer, Sappho, Plato, and the New Testament. Feel the world quiet down, like the hush that falls over a sleeping valley. We are about to enter a shadowed chapter of Greek history, a time of mystery and stillness. This period is known softly, almost poetically, as the Greek Dark Ages, a time that followed the fall of the mighty Mycenaean civilization. It began around 1100 BCE, and for nearly 400 years, the landscape of Greece changed, in ways that are both hidden and profound. It was a quiet revolution, blooming like spring after a long winter. Meanwhile, the old Mycenaean cities began to stir. Athens, untouched by invaders, grew slowly but steadily. Others like Thebes and Corinth rose once more. And far to the north, a new people entered the land, the Dorians, who brought with them a new dialect, a new style of pottery, and new ways of life. With their arrival came changes, in weapons, in farming, in social structures. Iron replaced bronze, making tools and weapons cheaper, stronger, and more accessible. Farming improved. People began to gather not just in villages, but in towns, in what would one day become great city-states. But still, there were no grand palaces. No massive temples. Not yet. This was a time of humble beginnings, when the land was still healing from its loss, when the people turned inward, and quietly found their strength. It was during the later part of this period, around 800 BCE, that something extraordinary happened. A man, or perhaps a group of men, began to sing the old stories in a new way. Their names were not written at first, but one name shines through the mist, Homer. Whoever he truly was, Homer gave us the Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the greatest poems the world has ever known. They were likely composed orally, recited to music, told by bards called rhapsodes, whose voices carried the past into the future, like soft winds over the sea. The Dark Ages, then, were not truly dark. They were quiet. They were waiting. A time of rest before the brilliance to come. By the end of this era, Greece was ready to awaken. The alphabet had returned. Trade had resumed. The city-states were rising. And the stories, oh, the stories had endured. So, dear listener, as we draw this chapter to a close, imagine a small village under the stars, a fire glowing, a bard leaning forward to speak. Sing, O Muse, of the wrath of Achilles. Close your eyes now. Let the soft hum of ancient voices soothe your thoughts. The night of the Dark Ages is almost over. The dawn of the Archaic period is near. This was the Archaic period, beginning around 800 BCE. It was not yet the time of Socrates or the Parthenon, but already, the world of Greece was changing. The darkness had passed. The alphabet had returned. And something new, something powerful, was taking shape. It was the rise of the polis, the city-state. A polis was more than just a city. It was a community, a world in miniature. It had its own government, its own army, its own customs and festivals. In each polis, the people began to feel a new kind of pride, not as Greeks in general, but as Athenians, or Spartans, or Corinthians. These city-states grew from earlier villages. They gathered around high places called acropolis, meaning high city, where temples and shrines would one day stand. Below, in the agora, or marketplace, people bought and sold goods, shared stories, and discussed the affairs of their community. Imagine the soft sound of sandals on stone, the smell of fresh olives. The quiet laughter of children chasing each other among columns, this was daily life in the polis. Most city-states were small. Just a few thousand citizens, not including women, children, or enslaved people. But their ideas, their ambition, would shape the world. And now, dear listener, let us look at two of the greatest city-states, not in battle, but in contrast. First, Athens. Even in the Archaic period, Athens was a place of curiosity and conversation. Its leaders were experimenting with new forms of government, slowly moving from kings, to aristocrats, to councils, and eventually toward democracy. Here, laws were being written down for the first time. A man named Draco created a harsh set of rules, so harsh, in fact, that we still use the word draconian to mean something severe. Later, another leader named Solon reformed these laws, easing punishments and giving more people a voice. These were the early steps, toward freedom, toward fairness. And then, there was Sparta. Tucked away in the southern region of the Peloponnese, Sparta was growing in a very different way. It was a city built on discipline, strength, and obedience. Boys were taken from their families at the age of 7 to begin military training. They lived in barracks, slept on reeds, and learned to speak little, but wisely. Sparta did not seek wealth or art. It sought order. Even the women, who had more rights than in other Greek cities, were trained to be strong, to give birth to strong sons. These two cities, Athens and Sparta, would one day clash. But for now, in the archaic period, they were rising side by side, symbols of the many ways to live and govern. And while these cities grew, the Greeks looked outward, across the sea. Population was rising. Land was scarce. And so the Greeks did something brave and bold, they began to colonize. From 800 to 500 BCE, Greek settlers sailed across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. They founded colonies as far west as Marseille in France, and as far east as the coast of modern Turkey and Ukraine. Each colony remained tied to its mother city, its metropolis, but also developed its own identity. They brought with them the Greek language, Greek gods, and Greek pottery. They built theaters and agoras, and in doing so, spread Greek culture far and wide. You might close your eyes now, and imagine a Greek ship gliding over calm waters, its sail full of wind, its hull heavy with amphorae of olive oil and wine. The sound of seabirds overhead, the shimmer of stars at night, and the quiet voices of settlers dreaming of new homes. This era also saw the rise of hoplite warfare, not battles fought by lone heroes, but by citizen soldiers, standing in rows, shields overlapping like scales, spears steady, feet firm in the dust. The hoplite phalanx was a symbol of unity, of discipline. Of a new kind of strength that came from fighting together. And in this time, new forms of government were tested. Some city-states were ruled by tyrants, not cruel rulers, necessarily, but men who seized power outside traditional laws. Many were popular at first, bringing order and helping the poor. But over time, the people would seek fairer systems, where power could be shared. The archaic period also saw the rebirth of art and literature. Sculptors began to carve kuroi, statues of young men, standing straight and still, with soft smiles and stylized hair. Potters painted scenes of gods, heroes, and daily life on vases, using black and red figures. And poets like Hesiod and Sappho sang of farming, love, and the lives of mortals. Even religion was changing. Temples grew larger. Sacrifices and festivals became more elaborate. The gods were honored not just in private, but in grand, public ways. And always, there were the myths. Stories of Zeus, Hera, Apollo, and Artemis. Woven into the rhythm of everyday life. So, dear listener, as we end this chapter, let your thoughts rest gently in this golden morning of Greece. The dark ages are gone. The city-states have taken root. The seas are alive with ships and voices. And Greece is awakening, bold, beautiful, and full of promise. We enter the world of Sparta. Nestled in the southern part of Greece, in a region known as the Peloponnese, Sparta was surrounded by mountains, natural walls of stone and time. Unlike the bright, buzzing streets of Athens, Sparta was a city of simplicity. There were no grand walls. No ornate temples or markets full of chatter. The strength of Sparta lay not in its buildings, but in its people. In Sparta, the highest virtue was discipline. A life without luxury. A life in service to the state. Let us begin gently, with the birth of a Spartan child. From the very start, life in Sparta was shaped by the needs of the city. When a child was born, they were inspected. If they were strong and healthy, they would be raised. But if they were weak, frail, or sickly, they might be left behind, exposed to the elements on the cold slopes of Mount Taygetus. It may sound harsh, and it was. But to the Spartans, survival of the strong was essential. Boys who passed this test would stay with their mothers until the age of 7. Then, they would be taken from home, and placed into the agoge, a training system that was both a school and a battlefield of the mind and body. Here, boys learned to endure pain, hunger, and hardship. They wore thin tunics in the cold. They walked barefoot. They were taught to speak little, but to speak wisely. Cleverness was praised, even if it meant stealing food. But if they were caught, they were punished. Not for stealing, but for failing. The goal was not cruelty. It was preparation. Preparation for a life of war, service, and obedience. By age 20, Spartan men joined the army, not just as soldiers, but as hoplites, citizen warriors who fought in a phalanx, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield. They lived in barracks, even after marriage, and ate meals together called syssitia, where loyalty and equality were prized. Their armor was simple. Their shields bore the Greek letter lambda, lambda. For Lacedaemon, their homeland. Their motto was clear, come back with your shield, or on it. This meant, return victorious, or not at all. But Spartan society was not only made of men. Let us now turn to the women of Sparta, strong, proud, and unique in the ancient world. Unlike most Greek women, Spartan women were educated. They ran, they wrestled, they sang, and they danced. They managed estates and controlled property, especially when the men were away at war. They were taught to be bold, to speak with strength. A Spartan mother might say to her son, with your shield, or on it. Not as a cruelty, but as a reminder of duty. And Spartan women, like their male counterparts, were devoted to the city, above all. Yet, beneath this order and strength, there was a darker truth. The Spartan way of life depended on the labor of the Helots, an enslaved population from the neighboring region of Messenia. These people farmed the land, so that the Spartan citizens could focus entirely on military life. The Helots were harshly treated, kept in fear, and sometimes ritually hunted by young Spartans during a chilling tradition called the Cryptia. Sparta was, in a way, a beautiful paradox. It valued equality, but only among its citizens. It created one of the strongest armies in history, but avoided expansion. It resisted change, and yet became legendary for its uniqueness. Unlike Athens, Sparta did not love philosophy, drama, or art. It did not build empires of culture. Instead, it built an empire of discipline. Even their politics were different. Sparta had a complex government. A mixed system with 2 kings, a council of elders known as the Gerousia, and 5 ephors who oversaw daily affairs. There was also an assembly of male citizens, but debate was limited. Unity was more important than eloquence. It was not democracy, but it was orderly, ancient, and deeply respected. And yet, the Spartans were not cruel for the sake of cruelty. They valued honor, silence, courage, and above all, the collective good. To be Spartan was to live for something greater than the self. Let us pause now, dear listener, and imagine the twilight over the hills of Laconia. You hear no music, no song. Only the sound of wind, passing over bronze helmets, and the footsteps of soldiers returning home. The Spartan warrior was not raised to seek glory. He was raised to serve. To protect. To die without fear. And though their city left few writings, and fewer monuments, the name of Sparta endures, whispered with awe through the ages. As we close this chapter, let your thoughts rest gently in the calm of order. The sun sets over Sparta. The stars rise, one by one, like silent guardians in the sky. And tomorrow, we will journey to a very different city. A place of philosophy, beauty, and the birth of democracy. We now enter Athens, the shining jewel of ancient Greece. Unlike Sparta, which whispered in strength and silence, Athens spoke. It debated. It questioned. It dreamed. It was a city of open air, of theater, of poetry, of democracy. But it was not always this way. Let us travel softly back, to its earliest days. Athens began like many Greek city-states, a cluster of villages surrounding a hill, the Acropolis. Upon this hill, sacred temples were built, and below it, the heart of the city, the Agora, came alive with voices. Here, people bought goods, exchanged ideas, and discussed the future of their city. In its early years, Athens was ruled by kings, then by aristocrats, powerful families who governed with wealth and lineage. These nobles controlled the land, made the laws, and judged disputes. But as time passed, change began to stir, quietly, persistently. The population grew. Farmers struggled with debt. The poor became restless. And a new class of merchants and craftsmen, wealthy but with no political power, began to demand a voice. Out of this gentle unrest, Athens would slowly create something the world had never seen: democracy. But first, there was a man named Draco. Around 621 BCE, Draco wrote down Athens' laws for the first time. Before this, justice had been passed down by word of mouth, often favoring the rich. But Draco's laws were severe. So severe that we still use the word draconian to mean harsh and unforgiving. For even petty crimes, the punishment was often death. Still, the idea that laws could be written and known was a step forward. A few decades later came Solon, a wise lawgiver and poet. He saw the suffering of the poor, the injustice in society, and decided it was time to act. Solon's reforms were gentle and thoughtful. He forgave debts, freed those who had been enslaved because of money, and reorganized the government to include more people, not just the aristocrats. He also encouraged trade, and reformed the court system, allowing ordinary citizens to serve as jurors. Though not yet a full democracy, Solon laid its foundation, brick by brick, law by law. Time passed. The road to democracy was not straight. There were tyrants like Pisistratus, who seized power but also supported the arts and built temples. His sons ruled after him, but were eventually overthrown. Then came Cleisthenes, around 508 BCE. Cleisthenes is often called the father of Athenian democracy. He broke the power of the noble families by reorganizing the citizens into new tribes, mixing people from different regions, so that local loyalty gave way to unity. He created a council of 500, where citizens were chosen by lot, not wealth, a radical idea. And he introduced ostracism, a peaceful way of protecting the state from rising tyrants. Each year, citizens could write the name of a person they feared might become too powerful. If that name appeared enough times, the person would be exiled, not as a punishment, but as a safeguard. Athens was slowly becoming a city where every free male citizen could vote, speak in the assembly, and help guide the future. It was not perfect. Women, slaves, and foreigners could not vote. And yet, for the first time in history, citizens governed themselves. Can you hear it now? The soft murmur of voices in the assembly. The rustle of papyrus scrolls. The sandals on marble floors as citizens gather to discuss the matters of the day. This was the heartbeat of Athens, not the sword, but the spoken word. And alongside politics, Athens bloomed with culture. Artists painted delicate scenes on vases, of gods and mortals, myths and banquets. Sculptors shaped marble into lifelike forms. Poets like Simonides and Pindar sang of heroes and victories. And philosophers began to ask questions that still echo today. What is justice? What is the good life? What does it mean to be free? But more on that, in later chapters. For now, imagine walking through ancient Athens at sunrise. The Acropolis shines in golden light. The temples are quiet, their columns stretching toward the sky. In the agora, the baker unwraps fresh loaves. The potter shapes clay. And nearby, a group of citizens gather, scrolls in hand, ready to speak, not for power, but for the people. This was the promise of Athens. And though wars and challenges would come, the idea of democracy had taken root. As we end this chapter, dear listener, let your breath slow. Let your mind rest in the warm light of freedom. You are standing in the city of ideas. A city that would one day give birth to philosophy, science, and drama. A city where voices rose, not in anger, but in debate. A city that still speaks to us, softly, but clearly, across the centuries. Not every Greek was a warrior or philosopher. Most were farmers, potters, bakers, herders, traders, and parents. They lived lives of quiet routines, shaped by nature, tradition, and the turning of the seasons. Let us begin with the home. A typical Greek house was made from mud brick, wood, and stone. It was simple on the outside, walls plain, often unpainted, but inside, there was care and calm. The courtyard was the heart of the home, open to the sky, where the family gathered, cooked, washed, and told stories. Rooms surrounded this space, each with its purpose: a sleeping room, a storeroom, sometimes a small shrine to the household gods. There were separate quarters for men and women, the andron and the gynaikon. The andron was where male guests were received, especially during symposia, evening gatherings of wine, music, and conversation. The gynaikon was where women worked, weaving cloth, preparing food, and raising children. Furniture was modest. Low wooden beds with woven ropes, clay oil lamps for light, and pottery for every need. There were no glass windows, just wooden shutters. Light filtered softly in, casting gentle patterns on the floors. Now, let us imagine a day, from sunrise to sunset. As dawn broke over the hills, the streets would awaken. Roosters crowed. Fires were lit. Bread was kneaded and baked in clay ovens. Water was fetched from the neighborhood fountain house, carried home in large amphorae. Men often went out, to the agora to buy and sell, or to the fields and workshops. Some served as soldiers, others as merchants, teachers, or builders. Women, depending on their status, usually stayed home. In wealthy households, they oversaw slaves and managed supplies. In poorer homes, they worked alongside their husbands, farming, weaving, even selling goods. Children played with dolls, wooden toys, or hoops. Boys might begin their education around age 7. Learning to read, write, recite poetry, and later, train in sports. Girls, on the other hand, were taught domestic skills, how to weave, cook, and care for the home. Education in ancient Greece was seen as vital, not just for knowledge, but for character. The goal was to become a well-rounded citizen, strong in body and wise in mind. Meals were simple. Breakfast might be bread dipped in wine. Lunch, perhaps cheese, olives, figs. And dinner, the main meal, would include vegetables, lentils, barley porridge, and sometimes fish. Meat was rare and usually reserved for festivals or sacrifices. Olive oil was essential, not only for cooking, but for lamps, skin, and religious rituals. Wine was also important, though always diluted with water. Drinking undiluted wine was seen as wild, even barbaric. And always, there was the marketplace, the agora, a place of voices and footsteps. There, merchants laid out goods beneath cloth canopies: fresh produce, fish, ceramics, cloth, sandals, and tools. Philosophers walked and talked. Citizens gathered for news, gossip, or politics. And under shady trees, teachers taught curious boys about the stars, the gods, and the ways of virtue. In the evenings, life slowed. Men returned home, often stopping for a symposium, a dinner party where wine flowed, music played, and poetry was shared. There, reclining on couches, they discussed love, war, and the soul. Music was everywhere. The lyre, soft and sweet. The aulos, like a double flute. Songs of Homer and Sappho floated through courtyards and over rooftops. Let us not forget religion, deeply woven into daily life. Small household shrines honored deities like Hestia, goddess of the hearth, or Hermes, protector of the home. Statues were given offerings, bits of food, oil, or incense, in gratitude or in hope. Every event, from birth to death, was marked by ritual. Babies were named on the 7th or 10th day after birth. Weddings were rich with song and procession. And funerals were solemn, with chants and offerings, as the dead were carried to their resting places outside the city walls. In between, there were festivals. Athenians celebrated Panathenea for Athena, with parades, sacrifices, and contests. There were harvest feasts, drama festivals, and days of solemnity and joy. These moments united the city, rich and poor alike, in worship, celebration, and tradition. And when night fell, the city dimmed, oil lamps flickered, and the stars spread across the sky. In the silence, families slept under woven blankets, listening to the soft sounds of dogs barking in the distance, the echo of footsteps fading, and the lullaby of a world both distant and familiar. So, dear listener, though the temples and battles are often what we remember, it is here, in the quiet lives of the many, that ancient Greece truly lived. Not just in marble, but in bread baked at dawn, in songs sung to children, in hands weaving thread, and voices telling stories by firelight. As we close this chapter, may your dreams be filled with the gentle rhythm of daily life, soft sandals on dusty roads, the scent of fresh olives, and the sound of lullabies beneath the moon. The gods of Olympus were not distant or perfect. They were powerful, yes, but they were also flawed, emotional, and deeply human. They loved, they fought, they wept, and they rejoiced. Their stories gave shape to joy, and comfort to sorrow. Let us begin softly, at the beginning. In the beginning, there was only chaos, a vast emptiness. From chaos came Gaia, the earth. Uranus, the sky. Tartarus, the deep underworld. And Eros, the force of love. Gaia and Uranus gave birth to many strange and powerful beings, the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the Centimanes, who had 100 hands. But Uranus feared his children, and he imprisoned them deep within the earth. Gaia, in pain, called on her son Cronos to rise up. And with a sickle, Cronos overthrew his father, becoming ruler of the cosmos. But Cronos, too, feared his children. One by one, he swallowed them, whole, to prevent them from taking his throne. Until one day, his wife Rhea hid their youngest son, Zeus, on the island of Crete. Zeus grew in secret, strong and clever. And when the time was right, he returned. He tricked Cronos into releasing his brothers and sisters, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. Together, they waged war against the Titans, a great battle called the Titanomachy. Thunder clashed, mountains trembled, and the seas rose. In the end, the Olympians triumphed. And Zeus became king of the gods, ruling from atop Mount Olympus. Now, close your eyes, and picture Olympus. A mountain that pierces the clouds, its peaks wrapped in mist. There, in golden halls, the gods feast on ambrosia and sip nectar. They watch the world below, and sometimes, descend to shape it. Let us meet some of these gods, softly, one by one. Zeus, the king, god of the sky, of lightning and justice. He holds the thunderbolt and rules with a mighty yet unpredictable will. Hera, his queen, goddess of marriage, proud and watchful. She is often jealous, yet deeply regal. Poseidon, brother of Zeus, god of the sea. He wields the trident, and with one strike, he can shake the earth or calm the waves. Hades, god of the underworld, silent, shadowed, and just. He rules over the dead, not with cruelty, but with law. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, motherly, gentle, and grieving. Her sorrow when her daughter Persephone is taken by Hades gives rise to winter. And her joy at her return brings the spring. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, born from Zeus's head, fully grown and armored. She is calm, strategic, and patron of Athens. Apollo, god of the sun, music, and prophecy, he plays the lyre, and his light brings clarity. Artemis, his twin, goddess of the moon and the hunt. She roams the forests with her bow, guardian of the wild and of young women. Ares, god of war, fierce, impulsive, and passionate. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, born from the sea foam. Wherever she walks, flowers bloom. Hephaestus, god of fire and forge, the divine craftsman, strong and scarred. Hermes, messenger of the gods, swift-footed, clever, and protector of travelers. And Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, wild, joyful, and mysterious. Each god had their own temples, festivals, and sacred animals. They were honored with sacrifices, hymns, and rituals. In every home, in every heart, their presence was felt. And yet, the gods were not the only ones in myth. There were heroes, mortals with divine blood, who lived extraordinary lives. Heracles, who performed 12 impossible labors. Perseus, who slew Medusa with a mirror and a sword. Theseus, who braved the labyrinth and defeated the Minotaur. Jason, who sailed with the Argonauts to find the Golden Fleece. And Odysseus, whose long journey home from war became the tale of endurance and wit. There were monsters, too. The Hydra, with its many heads. The Chimera, breathing fire. The Sirens, whose voices could lull sailors to death. And there were tragedies, beautiful, sorrowful tales. Like that of Orpheus and Eurydice, lovers parted by death. Or Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. Or Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. These stories were told through song, poetry, and drama, performed in theaters, painted on vases, whispered in the night. They taught lessons. They explained the inexplicable. And they gave meaning to the joys and sorrows of life. So, dear listener, as we close this chapter, imagine the stars above as the eyes of the gods. The rustling of leaves as the voice of a nymph. The distant rumble of thunder as the breath of Zeus. Greek mythology is not just a collection of tales. It is the poetry of a people, ancient, eternal, and alive. Hephaestus, god of fire and forge, the divine craftsman, strong and scarred. Hermes, messenger of the gods, swift-footed, clever, and protector of travelers. And Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, wild, joyful, and mysterious. Each god had their own temples, festivals, and sacred animals. They were honored with sacrifices, hymns, and rituals. In every home, in every heart, their presence was felt. And yet, the gods were not the only ones in myth. There were heroes, mortals with divine blood, who lived extraordinary lives. Heracles, who performed 12 impossible labors. Perseus, who slew Medusa with a mirror and a sword. Theseus, who braved the labyrinth and defeated the Minotaur. Jason, who sailed with the Argonauts to find the Golden Fleece. And Odysseus, whose long journey home from war became the tale of endurance and wit. There were monsters, too. The Hydra, with its many heads. The Chimera, breathing fire. The Sirens, whose voices could lull sailors to death. And there were tragedies, beautiful, sorrowful tales. Like that of Orpheus and Eurydice, lovers parted by death. Or Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. Or Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. These stories were told through song, poetry, and drama, performed in theaters, painted on vases, whispered in the night. They taught lessons. They explained the inexplicable. And they gave meaning to the joys and sorrows of life. So, dear listener, as we close this chapter, imagine the stars above as the eyes of the gods. The rustling of leaves as the voice of a nymph. The distant rumble of thunder as the breath of Zeus. Greek mythology is not just a collection of tales. It is the poetry of a people, ancient, eternal, and alive. Tens of thousands came to watch, not just to be entertained, but to reflect on life, fate, the gods, and the nature of being human. Religion and celebration were never separate. Festivals were both holy and joyful, filled with music, dance, food, and fire. There were sacrifices, usually of animals, the smoke rising as an offering to the gods. There were libations, wine poured gently onto the earth before a meal. There were choral songs, sung by men and women in flowing robes, their voices rising together like the wind in pine trees. Even the rhythms of the year were sacred. At harvest time, there was the Thesmophoria, a women-only festival for Demeter, goddess of grain and fertility. In winter, there were torchlit rituals for Persephone's return from the underworld. And always, the stars above seemed to shimmer a little more brightly. As if the gods themselves were watching, listening, smiling. So, dear listener, as you imagine these sacred festivals, the flicker of firelight, the pounding of drums, the roar of the crowd as a runner crosses the finish line. Know that to the Greeks, these were not mere pastimes. They were acts of devotion. Moments when the mortal and the divine came together in celebration, in honor, and in joy. As we gently close this chapter, let the echoes of ancient songs lull you. And feel, just for a moment, as if you too have stood beneath the statue of Zeus. Or watched a chariot race from the shade of an olive tree. We are now in the 5th century BCE, a time scholars and poets would later call the Golden Age. It was a brief moment in time, like the peak of a wave before it crashes back into the sea. But what Athens achieved in this moment changed the world forever. The Golden Age begins after a great struggle. Just years before, Athens, and all of Greece, had faced a mighty empire from the east, Persia. The Persian Wars were long and terrifying. And we will explore them in detail in a later chapter. But for now, know this. Athens, small and vulnerable, stood firm. And after victory, her spirit soared. The city was led by a wise and eloquent statesman, Pericles. Tall, thoughtful, and persuasive, Pericles believed deeply in democracy, in art, and in the power of ideas. Under his guidance, Athens rebuilt, not in fear, but in beauty. The most famous creation of this age. The Parthenon. Now, close your eyes. And imagine standing before it. A great temple of white marble. Its columns rising into the blue sky. Dedicated to Athena, the protector of the city. Inside stood a towering statue of the goddess, sculpted by Phidias, made of ivory and gold, holding a shield in one hand and Nike, the spirit of victory, in the other. The Parthenon was more than a building. It was a symbol, of faith, of beauty, of Athens itself. This was also a time of philosophy. On quiet mornings in the agora, you might have seen an old man, barefoot, questioning everyone he met. That man was Socrates. Socrates did not write. He asked questions. What is justice? What is courage? How should we live? He believed in examining life, deeply, honestly, bravely. His student, Plato, would later write down his dialogues. And Plato's student, Aristotle, would go on to shape the very foundations of logic, ethics, and science. Athens became the beating heart of thought. At night, the great open-air theaters came alive. Crowds gathered to watch tragedies and comedies. The plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides spoke of fate, love, pride, and suffering. The comedies of Aristophanes made the people laugh, and think, with satire and wit. In art, sculptors shaped marble into motion. You could see the folds of a robe, the curl of a smile, the tension of a muscle, all in stone. Painters told myths on pottery, black and red figures dancing, fighting, mourning. And in politics, democracy flourished. Citizens gathered in the ecclesia, the assembly, to vote on laws and foreign policy. Public officials were chosen by lot, not wealth. And great thinkers debated what it meant to govern wisely and justly. Athens was not perfect. There were slaves. Women had few rights. And its wealth often came from controlling others through an empire of tribute. But still, the city became a beacon of freedom, creativity, and human potential. Imagine now. A summer evening on the Acropolis. The sun sets over the hills. A gentle breeze stirs the olive trees. And you stand beside a column, hearing the soft murmur of philosophers, poets, and artists. All sharing their vision of the world. This was the Golden Age. A time when thought was as valued as strength. When beauty was a kind of truth. And when a small city by the sea gave birth to ideas that still shape our lives today. As we close this chapter, feel the light of that golden hour wash over you. Not just as history, but as inspiration. Athens and Sparta were both powerful. But oh, how different they were. Athens, a city of thinkers, sailors, artists, and traders. Open to new ideas, proud of its democracy and naval empire. Sparta, a landlocked city of warriors, discipline, and silence. Its citizens trained from childhood to fight. Its society focused entirely on strength, obedience, and survival. For a time, these cities were allies, especially during the Persian Wars. But after Persia's defeat, Athens grew rich and confident. Forming the Delian League, a group of allied city-states that paid tribute in gold, ships, or grain. Over time, Athens treated the League more like an empire. And Sparta, watchful, wary, began to fear its old friend. By 431 BCE, the tension snapped. The war began not with a grand battle, but with small sparks, revolts, disagreements, insults. And then, the flame caught. Now, dear listener, let's picture the war gently unfolding. Sparta was strong on land. Its army feared throughout Greece. But it had no great navy. Athens, meanwhile, ruled the sea. Its fleet of triremes, swift, triple-decked warships, kept it supplied and powerful. The first years of war were strange. Each side played to its strengths. Sparta invaded the countryside of Attica, burning fields and villages. But Athens, protected by its long walls, retreated behind its fortifications and used its navy to strike elsewhere. Then came disaster. In 430 BCE, a terrible plague struck Athens. Crowded within the walls, the people fell ill. Tens of thousands died, including their leader, Pericles. The city mourned. And yet, the war dragged on. There were brief moments of peace. But trust had withered. Each truce was broken. Each new hope, undone. One of the darkest moments came in 415 BCE. Athens, eager for glory, launched a massive expedition to Sicily, far across the sea. To conquer the city of Syracuse. But it was a terrible mistake. The expedition failed. The fleet was lost. Thousands of soldiers were captured, imprisoned in stone quarries, left to die. Athens was stunned. The Golden Age had faded. And yet, the war still continued. Sparta found new allies, including Persia, their former enemy. With Persian gold, Sparta built a fleet. And by 404 BCE, after decades of bloodshed, Athens surrendered. Its walls were torn down. Its empire was lost. And its people wept. Sparta now stood as the most powerful city in Greece. But even its victory brought no peace. The war had weakened all of Greece. Cities were burned, treasuries emptied, trust destroyed. The great historian Thucydides, who lived through the war, called it a tragedy of ambition and fear. Where the desire for power blinded even the wisest. Now, dear one, let us sit quietly for a moment, as the fires of war cool. And reflect. The Peloponnesian War teaches us that even the brightest civilizations can fall, not from invasion, but from within. From pride, mistrust, and the thirst to dominate. But it also reminds us that history is not only about power. It is about choices. And though Athens fell, her spirit, of learning, of questioning, of dreaming, would endure. Let us meet three of the greatest minds in human history. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Together, they formed a golden chain of wisdom. one philosopher teaching the next. Each building upon the thoughts of the other. Each changing the way we think, forever. We begin with Socrates. He left behind no books, no scrolls, no writings at all. And yet, he changed everything. Socrates was a humble man. Often barefoot, often deep in conversation. He wandered through the streets and markets of Athens. Stopping to ask questions. What is justice? What is beauty? What is the right way to live? He believed that true wisdom came not from having the answers, but from knowing how little we truly know. He used a method now called the Socratic method. Asking simple questions that reveal deeper truths, or deeper confusion. He did not preach. He did not claim to be wise. He simply helped others to think for themselves. But not everyone appreciated his questions. In time, Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. He was brought to trial. And when given a chance to escape or remain silent, he refused. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And so, he drank a cup of hemlock. And died calmly, surrounded by his students. One of those students was Plato. Now, picture a quiet garden, just outside the city. Birds singing, a small stream nearby. Here, Plato founded a school, the Academy, where philosophy could live and grow. Plato was a thinker and a dreamer. He believed in a world beyond this one. A world of perfect forms, unchanging, eternal. To him, everything in our world, a chair, a tree, even justice, was just a shadow of its perfect version. He wrote his ideas in dialogues, often featuring Socrates as the main voice. His most famous work, The Republic, asked, "What is a just society? And what kind of leader should rule?" He imagined a society ruled not by warriors or merchants, but by philosopher kings, wise, just, and devoted to the truth. Plato believed in the power of the mind. In reason and order. To him, the soul was divided. Reason, spirit, and desire, each needing balance. But even this great mind would be surpassed by his student, Aristotle. Aristotle was a careful observer of the world. Where Plato looked to the heavens, Aristotle looked to the earth. He believed in experience, evidence, and logic. He studied plants, animals, politics, ethics, and more. He asked how things worked. Why they moved. What made them flourish. He wrote hundreds of books. On biology, astronomy, poetry, and even how to be happy. To Aristotle, the goal of life was eudaimonia. A state of human flourishing, achieved through virtue and balance. He believed that everything had a purpose. A natural end it was moving toward. The acorn becomes an oak. The child becomes a thinker. The soul grows in wisdom. And when he taught a young prince named Alexander, he passed that love of learning to a future conqueror. So now, dear listener, let us rest beneath the shade of their thoughts. Let us sit beside Socrates as he questions a young Athenian. Let us wander through Plato's academy, where ideas bloom like wildflowers. Let us follow Aristotle through the woods as he clasps a scroll and observes the movement of the stars. These philosophers were more than men. They were seekers. Not of riches, not of power, but of understanding. And through them, we are reminded that the greatest journey is the one inward. Greek architecture was based on order. A sense that everything had its place. Temples were not just places of worship. They were offerings to the gods themselves. Built to please the divine eye. And to inspire awe in the human soul. The Greeks developed three architectural orders, or styles. Doric, strong and plain. Thick columns with simple tops. Found often in mainland Greece, especially in Sparta and early temples. Ionic, graceful and slender. Columns with curled volutes at the top, like scrolls. Used in eastern cities and the islands. Corinthian, the most elaborate. Richly decorated with leaves and floral patterns. Used more often in later periods. These styles weren't just decoration. They expressed philosophy in stone. Doric spoke of strength. Ionic of elegance. Corinthian of richness and beauty. Now, return with me to the Acropolis. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, is a Doric masterpiece. Yet even within its symmetry, there are subtle curves. To correct the imperfections of the human eye. The columns lean ever so slightly inward. The floor rises gently in the center. And the sculptural details, oh, the sculptures. High above, in the pediments, were mythological scenes. On one side, Athena's birth from the head of Zeus. On the other, her contest with Poseidon for the city's favor. Around the outside ran the frieze. A carved procession of horsemen, musicians, and maidens. Celebrating the Panathenaic festival. A moment frozen in marble, alive with quiet energy. Amphora pottery, stories on clay. Greek pottery, too, tells us beautiful stories. Imagine holding a small vase. Its surface smooth and cool. Painted in black and red, it shows Achilles and Hector, locked in battle. Or Heracles, wrestling a lion. There were two major styles. Black figure pottery, where figures were painted in black silhouette on red clay. Details were etched in with a sharp tool. Red figure pottery, which reversed the colors. Allowing for greater detail, softer curves, and expressive faces. Pottery wasn't just art. It held wine, water, oil. It marked graves. It celebrated victories. And told the myths that shaped the Greek imagination. Each piece was made with care. Thrown on a wheel, painted by hand. Fired in a kiln. A labor of patience and love. Moai sculpture, life in stone. Greek sculpture was a journey. From the rigid, smiling statues of the early archaic period. To the flowing, lifelike figures of the classical age. Early statues like the Kouros, a young man standing straight, fists at his sides. Were influenced by Egyptian forms. But over time, Greek sculptors began to explore movement, emotion, and naturalism. By the 5th century BCE, artists like Phidias, Myron, and Polykleitos created wonders. Phidias sculpted the great Athena in the Parthenon. And also a giant statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Myron crafted the Discobolus, the discus thrower. Capturing tension, grace, and motion in a single moment. Polykleitos wrote a guide to proportions, called the Canon. Believing that perfect beauty came from perfect balance. Later, in the Hellenistic period, sculpture grew even more dramatic. Statues showed pain, passion, and age. Like the Laocoon, writhing in agony. Or the winged victory of Samothrace, poised in flight, robes rippling in the wind. These were not just statues. They were emotions in marble. Herb beauty with purpose. For the Greeks, beauty was not a luxury. It was a path to the divine. A reflection of truth and order. Art was everywhere, in temples, theaters, homes, and gardens. It wasn't locked away in museums. It lived in the world. The earliest plays were part of a festival. The Dionysia, held in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and revelry. People gathered in vast open-air theaters, like the one in Epidaurus. Where sound echoed so perfectly. You could hear a whisper from the back row. The actors wore large masks. Painted with expressions, joy, sorrow, rage. These masks helped the audience see emotion from afar. And allowed each actor to play many roles. Let us explore the 2 great forms of Greek drama. Tragedy and comedy. Performing arts tragedy, the fall of the great. Greek tragedy told stories of gods and kings, of heroes and their downfall. But more than that, it explored the deepest human emotions: pride, guilt, love, and fate. Three playwrights stand tall in this shadowed world. Aeschylus, often called the father of tragedy. His plays were grand and solemn. Like the Orestia, a trilogy about revenge, justice, and the curse upon the house of Atreus. He introduced the idea that even the gods could be questioned, that law and morality could grow and change. Sophocles, a poet of humanity and fate. His most famous work, Oedipus Rex, tells the haunting story of a man who unknowingly fulfills a terrible prophecy, killing his father, marrying his mother. Sophocles showed us the pain of self-discovery, and the thin line between innocence and guilt. Euripides, the rebel. His tragedies were raw and psychological. He gave voice to women, slaves, and outcasts. In Medea, we see a woman betrayed, who takes a terrifying revenge on her husband, and on her own children. These plays were not just entertainment. They were a mirror, showing the Greeks what it meant to be human, and what it meant to suffer. Grinning face with smiling eyes comedy, laughter with meaning. In contrast, Greek comedy was sharp, playful, and often very bold. The master of ancient comedy was Aristophanes. His plays were filled with music, jokes, and satire. In Lysistrata, the women of Greece band together and refuse intimacy with their husbands to force an end to the Peloponnesian War. In the Clouds, he pokes fun at Socrates and the new ways of thinking. And in the Frogs, he sends the god Dionysus to the underworld to bring back a great poet, because Athens needs saving. Comedy allowed the Greeks to laugh at themselves, at politics, at philosophers, even at the gods. It was light, but not shallow. Behind the humor were serious questions. Books, the power of literature. Outside the stage, the Greeks created a literary world that still shapes us today. At the very beginning was Homer, the blind bard whose words echo through time. In the Iliad, he tells the story of the Trojan War, of Achilles, wrathful and proud, of Hector, noble and doomed. A tale not just of war, but of honor, grief, and the price of glory. In the Odyssey, we follow Odysseus on his long journey home, through storms, monsters, temptation, and loss, to love, and to peace. These epic poems were sung by memory, passed down for generations, until finally written in lines of rolling rhythm. Later poets and writers added their own voices. Hesiod, with his tales of the gods in Theogony. Sappho, the lyrical poet from Lesbos, whose delicate verses whispered of love and longing. Pindar, praising athletes in golden odes. And the great historians. Herodotus, with his curious, wondering tales of far-off lands. And Thucydides, cool and tragic, recording the Peloponnesian War as it tore Greece apart. Crescent moon stories for the soul. To the Greeks, storytelling was sacred. Whether sung in song, spoken on stage, or written in scrolls. Stories helped them understand life and death, love and betrayal, duty and desire. The theater was a place of catharsis, where emotions could rise and fall and leave the soul lighter. Now, dear listener, close your eyes. Can you hear the distant rhythm of sandals on stone? The hush of a crowd before the first line is spoken? The slow unfolding of a story that still speaks to us, even now. Greek literature and drama remind us that we are not alone in our joys or sorrows. That across centuries and seas, the human heart remains the same. In the ancient world, the family was everything. Not just parents and children, but grandparents, servants, slaves, and even the spirits of ancestors, who were honored at the hearth. Let us begin with the structure of family life. And then explore the roles of women, the upbringing of children, and the quiet rhythms of daily life. Amphora, the family unit. In most city-states, especially Athens, the father, or Kyrios, was the head of the household. He managed the land, finances, and legal matters. He represented the family in public life. The mother, while often hidden from public view, had her own powerful realm within the home. Children were valued greatly, but infant mortality was high. Newborns were presented to the family by the father. And sadly, not all were kept. Those who were sickly or unwanted might be left outside, a practice known as exposure. But those who were accepted were deeply loved, and taught the values of Greek society from an early age. Woman, the role of women. In Athens, women lived largely in the private sphere. They rarely appeared in public without a male guardian. They could not vote, hold office, or own property in most cases. But within the home, their role was vital. The ideal Athenian woman was modest, obedient, and silent. She managed the household, raised the children, and oversaw the slaves. She spun wool, wove cloth, prepared food, and tended to the hearth. She honored the gods, especially Hestia, goddess of the home. Marriage was arranged, often when girls were just 14 or 15, given in marriage by their father to a man much older. Her dowry, a portion of family wealth, followed her into the new home. But she remained largely under male control. Yet despite these limitations, women found quiet strength. They preserved culture, educated the young, passed down stories and rituals, and created emotional bonds that held households together. And there were exceptions. In Sparta, women lived differently. They were trained in physical fitness, encouraged to speak boldly, and managed estates while men were at war. Spartan women could own land, and were respected as mothers of warriors. As one Spartan woman was said to have told her son, "Come back with your shield, or on it." Women also found voice in religion. They served as priestesses, participated in festivals, and held sacred roles in rituals like the Thesmophoria, a fertility celebration in honor of Demeter. In literature, women appeared as powerful symbols. Helen of Troy, whose beauty launched 1,000 ships. Medea, both wife and avenger. Penelope, loyal and clever. These stories reveal a complex image of admiration, fear, and reverence for feminine power. Baby raising the young. Children in Greece were cherished, though treated differently depending on gender. Boys were educated to become citizens. In Athens, they began school at age 7, learning to read, write, play the lyre, and recite poetry. They studied Homer, practiced rhetoric, and trained in sports to prepare for future military service. At 18, they took an oath of loyalty to the city, and entered into 2 years of training as ephebes, young citizens. Girls, in most places, were taught at home by their mothers or nurses. They learned household skills, spinning, cooking, and music. Their education prepared them for marriage and motherhood. In Sparta, both boys and girls were trained physically. Running, wrestling, throwing javelins. Strength was seen as necessary for survival. House, the home and its rhythm. A Greek home, or oikos, was simple and functional. Rooms opened onto a central courtyard. There were separate spaces for men and women, and usually a small altar to the household gods. Meals were simple: bread, olives, cheese, fruit, and occasionally fish. Water or wine mixed with water was drunk from small cups. Men would sometimes hold symposia, drinking parties with music and discussion, where women entertainers known as hetaira might be present. But respectable wives rarely joined. The home was also a place of ritual. Sacrifices, offerings, and ceremonies marked births, weddings, and deaths. When someone died, women led the mourning. They prepared the body, wailed at the graveside, and lit oil lamps in memory. The rhythms of Greek domestic life were shaped by seasons, festivals, and the silent labor of generations. Crescent moon, a quiet power. Though history often forgets them, Greek women lived with quiet resilience. They worked in silence, but their hands shaped the next generation. They did not speak in assemblies, but their stories passed from cradle to cradle. Their names are few, but their presence was everywhere. In every home, every child, every fire that warmed the night. The Greeks were not only poets and sculptors. They were seekers of truth. And truth, for them, meant understanding the natural world. From the smallest plant to the movement of the heavens. They believed that everything had a cause, a purpose, and that the human mind could discover it. Let us explore this soft and sacred world of astronomy, mathematics, natural science, and medicine. Milky Way, gazing at the stars, astronomy and the cosmos. To the ancient Greeks, the heavens were not chaotic. They were ordered, rhythmic, divine. The earliest sky watchers, like Thales of Miletus, saw patterns in the stars. Thales is said to have predicted a solar eclipse, and believed that water was the essence of all things. His student, Anaximander, imagined the earth as a floating cylinder, suspended in space, a radical idea. Then came Pythagoras, a lover of numbers and harmony. He taught that the cosmos moved like music, that planets made sound as they spun, creating a music of the spheres too delicate for human ears. Later, Aristarchus of Samos made an astonishing claim, that the earth moved around the sun. A heliocentric theory, long before Copernicus. And Hipparchus mapped the stars, invented trigonometry, and calculated the length of the solar year with remarkable accuracy. But perhaps the most famous ancient astronomer was Ptolemy. His geocentric model, placing Earth at the center, would be used for over 1,000 years. Though not always correct. The Greeks laid the foundation for astronomy as a science, driven by observation, reason, and wonder. Triangular ruler numbers and nature, mathematics and natural philosophy. The Greeks believed that numbers governed the universe. Euclid, the father of geometry, wrote a book called The Elements, a beautifully structured guide to shapes, proofs, and logic. It became one of the most used textbooks in history. Then there was Archimedes. Brilliant, playful, and endlessly curious. He discovered the principle of buoyancy, and supposedly cried, "Eureka," after stepping into a full bathtub. He also invented clever machines and war devices. All from the quiet city of Syracuse. Aristotle, too, was a towering thinker. He wrote on physics, biology, logic, and ethics. Though not always correct, his method of observing, classifying, and reasoning shaped science for centuries. He believed everything in nature had a purpose, that the heart was the center of thought, and that all living things could be organized in a ladder of life. The Greeks did not separate science from philosophy. They saw them as part of one great quest to understand reality. Brain healing the body, Greek medicine. Now let us turn to the human body. To its aches, its pulses, its quiet miracles. Greek medicine was a blend of ritual, observation, and reason. In earlier times, illness was seen as divine punishment. People sought healing at temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine. In places like Epidaurus, the sick would sleep in sacred rooms, hoping for dreams in which the god would reveal a cure. But in time, a more rational medicine emerged. Centered around one name, Hippocrates. He lived in the 5th century BCE. And is often called the father of modern medicine. Hippocrates taught that disease came from natural causes, not the gods. He observed symptoms, kept records, and believed in careful diagnosis. His approach emphasized the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, they thought, was a balance of these fluids. Imbalance brought illness. Diet and lifestyle. Good food, clean water, rest, and moderation. These were keys to health. The Hippocratic Oath. A promise that doctors would do no harm, and care for the sick with respect and ethics. Parts of it are still used by doctors today. Later physicians like Galen expanded Greek medical knowledge, performing dissections on animals, and writing extensively on anatomy and surgery. Though some ideas were wrong, Greek medicine marked a turning point. From superstition to science. Spiral shell science with soul. The Greeks believed that knowledge was sacred. They saw no sharp line between science, philosophy, and spirituality. To understand nature was to honor the gods. To study the stars was to trace the thoughts of creation. To heal the body was to bring harmony to the soul. Now, dear one, imagine the flicker of an oil lamp in a scholar's study. A gentle hand tracing a diagram on papyrus. The hush of students gathered in a garden, listening to a teacher speak of stars, wind, and blood. It is the early 5th century BCE. And Greece is about to face its greatest test. Bow and arrow, the rise of Persia. To understand the Persian Wars, we must begin in the Grand Empire of Persia. Under rulers like Cyrus the Great, Darius I, and Xerxes. The Persian Empire stretched from India to the Mediterranean. A vast and powerful realm. They built roads, collected tribute, and ruled through governors called satraps. Persia was mighty, well-organized, and ambitious. To the east, tiny Greek city-states dotted the coast of Asia Minor. Especially the region of Ionia. These cities, though Greek in culture, were under Persian control. But the Greeks, proud and independent, chafed under Persian rule. Fire the spark, Ionian revolt. In 499 BCE, the city of Miletus led a revolt. Other Ionian cities joined. Athens and Eretria sent ships to help. Together, they burned the city of Sardis, a Persian outpost. This angered Darius I deeply. He vowed to punish the Athenians, and to bring all of Greece under Persian control. Thus began the first great clash. The first Persian invasion. Crossed swords, the Battle of Marathon, 490 BCE. Darius sent a fleet across the Aegean. They landed near the plains of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians, outnumbered, marched to meet them. They were joined by a small force from Plataea. The Spartans had promised help, but were delayed by a religious festival. The Greek commander, Miltiades, chose to attack quickly. With brilliant strategy, the Greeks charged the Persians in a tight phalanx formation. Wings strong, center slightly weak. Encircling and defeating the Persian army. It was a shocking victory. The mighty empire had been humbled by a small city. A runner, Phidippides, is said to have sprinted from Marathon to Athens, to cry out, Nike, victory, and then collapse. From this legend, we get the modern marathon race. Water wave, the second invasion, return of Persia. But Persia was not done. After Darius died, his son Xerxes took the throne. He prepared a massive invasion, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of ships, and a bridge of boats across the Hellespont. In 480 BCE, the storm returned. Now, many Greek city-states came together. They formed a fragile Hellenic league, led by Sparta and Athens. The first stand came at a narrow pass in the north, called Thermopylae. Shield the heroic stand, Thermopylae. Here, a small force of Greeks, including 300 Spartans under King Leonidas, held the pass for 3 days against the massive Persian army. They fought with skill and courage, but were betrayed by a local who showed Xerxes a hidden path. Surrounded, Leonidas and his men fought to the death. Their sacrifice gave the other Greeks time to retreat and regroup. And their story became legendary, a symbol of resistance, honor, and devotion. Ship clash at sea, the Battle of Salamis. While Thermopylae fell, the Persian navy sailed south. Athens was evacuated and later burned. But the Greek fleet, led by the cunning Athenian Themistocles, lured the Persians into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, the large Persian ships struggled to maneuver. The smaller, faster Greek triremes struck decisively. The Persian navy was crushed. Xerxes, watching from a golden throne, realized the tide had turned. He returned to Persia, leaving some forces behind. Classical building final victory, Plataea and Mycale. In 479 BCE, the Greeks struck back. At Plataea, a united Greek army defeated the remaining Persian forces. On the same day, at Mycale, they won a great naval victory. The war was over. Greece had survived. Not because of size or wealth, but because of unity, strategy, and fierce independence. Wind faced the echo of defiance. The Persian Wars left a lasting legacy. Athens rose in power, leading the Delian League. Sparta gained honor for its sacrifice. Greek pride grew, along with rivalry. More importantly, the wars showed that freedom was worth fighting for. That even small city-states could resist the greatest empires, if they stood together. Now, dear listener, let the sounds of battle fade like waves retreating from the shore. And imagine a quiet hillside where a monument reads, "Go tell the Spartans that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." This is Macedon, a land of hardy farmers and fierce horsemen. Nestled between the forests of the Balkans and the warm waters of the Thermaic Gulf. Sunrise over mountains, a kingdom awakens. For centuries, Macedon was little noticed by the polished cities of southern Greece. Its people spoke a rough dialect of Greek and lived close to the earth. But in 359 BCE, a sharp-eyed, broad-shouldered nobleman seized the throne. Philip II. Philip was more than a king, he was a visionary general. He reorganized the Macedonian army into a devastating phalanx. Heavy infantry armed with sarissas, pikes over 6 meters long. Behind them rode the companion cavalry, swift and disciplined, ready to strike like a falcon at his signal. Philip's army swept outward, first securing Macedon, then subduing neighboring tribes, and finally turning south. In 338 BCE, at the Battle of Kyrenia, Macedon met the combined forces of Athens and Thebes. Philip's strategy, and the daring charge of his 18-year-old son, Alexander, broke the Greek resistance. Greece, once a patchwork of rival cities, now answered to Macedon. But Philip did not live to finish his dream of invading Persia. In 336 BCE, during a festival, he was assassinated, struck down by a lone conspirator. Torches flickered in shock, the court held its breath. And then, like dawn after storm clouds, Alexander stepped forward. Crown Alexander ascends. Alexander was 20, restless, brilliant, and schooled by Aristotle himself. Legends whispered that his mother, Olympias, told him he descended from Achilles, while Philip insisted he traced his line to Heracles. Whether man or myth, Alexander believed he was born for greatness. Yet his throne was anything but secure. Northern tribes rebelled, Greek cities muttered of freedom. Alexander rode out, swift as thought, crushing revolts in Thrace. Then sweeping south to Thebes, when Thebes rose against him, he answered with terrible finality. The city walls fell, its temples burned, and only shrines and poets were spared. Greece would not rebel again. Now the young king's path lay east, across the sea, toward Persia. Dagger into Asia, Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with some 40,000 troops. At the river Granicus, Persian satraps awaited. Alexander led the charge himself, water splashing around his horse's flanks. The sun flashing on his bronze helmet. Victory came quickly, Asia Minor opened like a welcoming gate. Farther south, at Issus, he met King Darius III. The Persians outnumbered the Macedonians. But Alexander's wedge of companion cavalry pierced the Persian line. Darius fled, leaving behind his chariot, and his family. Alexander treated the queen and princesses with honor. Earning a reputation not only for courage, but for mercy. He turned next to the Phoenician coast, where priests hailed him as a son of Ammonius Ra. At the new city of Alexandria, he gazed over the sparkling delta, dreaming of libraries, harbors, and light that would guide sailors for centuries. But the heart of Persia still beat in Mesopotamia. In 331 BCE, on the plain of Gaugamela, Darius gathered a vast host. War elephants, scythed chariots, tens of thousands of infantry. Under moonlight Alexander prayed to Fear, begging the goddess to leave his soldiers. At dawn, dust swirled in rising heat. The Macedonian phalanx held the center, Alexander rode right, seeking the slightest gap. Then, like an arrow, he struck. Again Darius fled, the Persian army collapsed. The road to Babylon, Susa, and glittering Persepolis lay open. Alexander entered Persepolis, capital of Persia's ancient kings. Gold and silver flowed in endless corridors, peacocks strutted in palace gardens. Yet amid celebration, anger smoldered, revenge for the Persian burning of Athens a century before. One night, whether in drunken impulse or deliberate symbol, Alexander allowed the palace to burn, flames leaping against the starry sky, turning cedar roofs to cinders, leaving only marble colonnades in ghostly moonlight. Sunrise over mountains beyond the ends of the earth. But empire, once begun, is hard to stop. Alexander pursued Darius north, finding him dead by a satrap's treachery. He took the royal signet, calling himself King of Kings. Yet he was not satisfied. He marched east through the Oxus valleys, over blazing deserts and icy passes. Founded cities named Alexandria to anchor Greek culture. Married the Bactrian princess Roxana, and adopted Persian dress. Some Macedonians grumbled, others followed, mesmerized. At last, in 326 BCE, he reached the Indus River. Facing King Porus and war elephants beneath monsoon clouds. Even victory here could not quell his weary men. On the banks of the Hyphasis, they refused to go farther. Alexander wept, then relented, turning back toward Babylon. His new capital. In Babylon, dreams blossomed. A navy to circle Arabia, roads to knit Asia, mixed armies of Macedonians and Persians. But destiny whispered its own terms. In June 323 BCE, after a banquet, Alexander fell ill, feverish, silent. Too weak to lift his signet ring. For days he lay near the Euphrates, soldiers filing past in mute farewell. He died at 32, having reshaped the world in just 12 years. Alexander left no heir of age. His generals, the Diadochi, carved the empire like lions over prey. Ptolemy took Egypt, where his line would rule for 300 years, ending with Cleopatra. Seleucus seized Syria and Mesopotamia. Antigonus, Lysimachus, Cassander, each claimed their share. From this turmoil rose the Hellenistic world. Cities humming with blended cultures. Greek language mingling with Persian, Egyptian, Bactrian tongues. Statues that breathed new emotion. Philosophies that pondered both cosmos and personal peace. The torch of Greece, carried by Macedon, now lit far-flung horizons. It is the late 4th century BCE. And the world is changing. Alexander the Great is gone. But his dream has taken root. All across the lands he once ruled. Greek language, art, and knowledge spread like the scent of jasmine on a summer breeze. But now they are mingled, infused, with Persian wisdom, Egyptian mystery, and Eastern thought. This is the Hellenistic age. And it will shine with wonder. Cityscape, a new kind of city. Imagine now, a busy harbor city. Ships arriving from Cyprus, Arabia, India. Hear the creak of ropes, the splash of oars. Smell spices from distant lands, cinnamon, saffron, frankincense. This is Alexandria in Egypt. One of the many cities founded by Alexander, but here, it flourished like no other. With its wide avenues, marble buildings, and towering lighthouse on Pharos Island. Alexandria became the jewel of the Hellenistic world. Scholars gathered at the Library of Alexandria. A temple of knowledge said to hold over 400,000 scrolls. Covering medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Greek ideas mixed with Egyptian thought. Jewish scholars wrote in Greek, Babylonian star charts were copied by hand. It was, perhaps, the world's first great melting pot. Artist palette culture without borders. Art in the Hellenistic world was different from earlier Greek styles. In the classical era, sculptures showed perfect balance, calm faces, ideal beauty. But now, artists explored emotion. Grief, laughter, old age, even deformity. Look at the Laocoon group. A twisting marble scene of a priest and his sons caught in coils of sea serpents. Every muscle strained, every face filled with fear and pain. Or the Venus de Milo. Her soft curves and mysterious smile showing both divinity and vulnerability. This was art for a wider world, where people of many cultures and classes could see themselves reflected in marble and bronze. Brain new schools of thought. The philosophers of this age stepped away from politics and war. And turned inward, toward the soul. The Stoics, led by Zeno, taught that peace came from virtue. From accepting life as it is, with courage and calm. Imagine them walking under colonnades. Murmuring about reason and fate. Telling students that storms will come. But one can learn to be still within them. The Epicureans, meanwhile, found wisdom in simple pleasures. Good food, close friends, quiet gardens. And freedom from fear, especially the fear of the gods or death. They whispered, life is short. Seek joy, and harm none. And the skeptics asked. How can we know anything for sure? They advised curiosity, open-mindedness, and humility. In these philosophies, we hear the gentle heartbeat of the Hellenistic world. A world unsure of its future, yet searching for peace. Telescope science and discovery. This was also a time of great scientific flowering that in Alexandria, the brilliant Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference. With amazing accuracy, using just shadows and a stick. Archimedes, from Syracuse, played with levers, pulleys, and floating bodies. And cried, Eureka, when he solved a puzzle in the bath. Hipparchus mapped the stars, Herophilus studied the human nervous system. These thinkers combined Greek curiosity with knowledge gathered from Babylon, Egypt, and beyond. They taught that the world was knowable. That the stars, the body, and even the soul could be gently examined. Crossed swords kings and kingdoms. But while knowledge bloomed, the lands of Alexander's empire were not at peace. His generals, the Diadochi, had divided his conquests. In Egypt, Ptolemy ruled wisely and founded a dynasty that would last for centuries, ending with Cleopatra. In the Seleucid Empire, stretching through Persia and Mesopotamia, Greek cities rose along trade routes, even as eastern rebellions stirred. In Macedon, rulers struggled to keep order, always wary of Rome, rising silently in the west. These Hellenistic kingdoms often fought each other, yet still shared a common language, art, and thought. Coins bore the same gods. Temples echoed familiar prayers. And Greek became the language of trade, science, and learning. Globe showing Europe-Africa a world interwoven. The Hellenistic world was a web of connections. Merchants carried silk from China, pepper from India, glass from Syria, and papyrus from Egypt. Temples to Greek gods stood beside local shrines. Statues of Zeus appeared with Persian robes or Indian poses. Children in Bactria read Homer, while children in Athens learned of Eastern stars. No longer purely Greek. This world was hybrid, multicultural, vibrant. It was imperfect, there was still inequality, slavery, and war. But it was richer. Full of voices once distant, now heard together. Crescent moon soft dusk over an empire. By the 2nd century BCE, the Hellenistic world began to dim. Rome, patient and powerful, expanded steadily. First into Greece, then into Egypt and the East. But even as new rulers came, the imprint of the Greeks remained. Roman architecture echoed Greek temples. Roman education revered Aristotle and Plato. And Latin borrowed freely from the Greek tongue. The Hellenistic age may have ended, but its heartbeat lived on. In libraries, in language, and in the quiet thoughts of philosophers under olive trees. Though the temples of Athens stand in ruins, though the great empires of Greece have long crumbled into dust, the ideas, the stories, and the dreams of that distant world have never truly vanished. They have been carried forward, like glowing embers across the ages, into the art, science, philosophy, and politics of the modern day. Classical building democracy's first light, perhaps the clearest thread from ancient Greece to today, is the idea of democracy. In the 5th century BCE, the citizens of Athens gathered in the ecclesia, a great assembly held on the Nix hill. They debated laws, voted on war and peace, and held their leaders accountable, not by sword, but by the will of the people. Though their democracy was limited, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners, its spirit planted the first seed. Centuries later, as the United States formed, and revolutions stirred in France and beyond, thinkers and lawmakers looked back to Athens for inspiration. Even today, when citizens cast votes or speak freely in a public square, they walk in the footsteps of ancient Greeks, performing arts, theater, and storytelling. Now close your eyes and imagine the flicker of torchlight on stone steps, the murmur of a crowd gathering under the stars. This is the Greek theater, where stories of gods and mortals were brought to life with music, masks, and chorus. Playwrights like Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes wrote dramas that still move us. Tales of pride and fate, of love and loss, of laughter and critique. Modern theater, from Shakespeare to Broadway, still carries Greek roots. Tragedy and comedy, monologues, stage directions, and even the idea of exploring deep moral questions through drama, all began in those ancient amphitheaters. Amphora art and architecture. Step now into a museum, or stroll past a courthouse or university, and you may see columns, marble domes, and symmetrical facades. These are the echoes of Greek architecture. The graceful columns of Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian design. From the Parthenon in Athens to the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., Greek style has shaped our built environment. Greek sculpture, too, transformed how humans are depicted. Their study of anatomy, proportion, and expression influenced the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and still inspires modern artists. The idea that beauty lies in balance, form, and harmony. That, too, is a gift from ancient Greece. Brain philosophy and rational thought. Now let your thoughts drift gently to a quiet grove outside Athens, where a barefoot man, Socrates, asks questions of passing youths. What is justice? What is the good life? How do we know what we know? His student Plato wrote dialogues filled with these questions. And his student Aristotle would go on to shape logic, biology, ethics, and politics. To this day, their works are studied in schools and universities around the world. They form the very foundation of Western philosophy. The methods of reasoning, of critical thinking, of asking why and pursuing truth gently and patiently. These are all part of the Greek legacy. Telescope science and curiosity. Ancient Greece was not only a land of poetry and politics, but also of science. Think of Pythagoras, whispering about triangles and harmony in music. Or Hippocrates, offering medicine not as magic, but as careful observation. Or Euclid, whose geometry still shapes math classrooms today. These thinkers laid the groundwork for scientific inquiry, based on observation, logic, and questioning. Today's researchers, whether in physics, astronomy, or medicine, carry on that same spirit of curiosity that first stirred on the shores of the Aegean. Books, words, and language, even the very words we speak, carry traces of Greece. The word philosophy means love of wisdom in Greek. Democracy, theater, biology, logic, school, planet, all come from Greek roots. The Greek alphabet was the ancestor of the Latin one, which in turn became the script we use today. So when you read these words, you read with an alphabet first etched by Athenian scribes over 2,000 years ago. Thought ballooned the Greek spirit in us all. More than buildings or names, what truly remains is the Greek spirit. The boldness to ask questions. The love of beauty and reason. The belief that each person has a role to play in the world. That we can strive for meaning, excellence, and truth. This spirit lives not just in books or statues, but in every quiet moment of wonder. Every act of creation. Every time we reach beyond what we know, seeking something more. Crescent moon, a peaceful closing. And now, dear listener, we have walked gently together through the story of ancient Greece. From the olive groves of Crete to the thundering phalanxes of Macedon. From Plato's academy to the peaceful gardens of the Hellenistic world. Through war and wisdom, gods and geometry, heroes and hearths. And though the temples may crumble, and the marble may weather, the light of Greece endures. Quiet, gentle, eternal. As you rest now, know that the story of the past lives on in you. You are part of that long thread of history, woven softly across time, carrying forward the dreams of those who came before. May your night be calm, your dreams be bright, and your heart stay open to the wonder of the ancient world. Good night. And thank you for walking this journey with me.